Okay, I think we are live now. How are you, Dr. Lane? It's been a while.
Dr. Ingrid, it has been a while. There's, at least for myself, there's been, health issues and all that kind of stuff. I'm on my way to recovery. So, and I'm, sure that there's been reasons that you've not been able to have this podcast.
Oh, yes, a lot of reasons, but mainly if I have to condense them all in like one, I'm not even going to say sentence. I'm going to say in one word, I would say time, lack thereof, lack of
Right.
time. Um, as you know, I was preparing for a wedding. It happened over a year ago, so that's not
Okay. All
huge
right. Good.
for the past year. But I've been very, very busy with work. But those are all good things. I'm
Those are
glad
good
to
things. Yeah.
see you back, and I'm glad to see that you're feeling better. That's always a great thing.
It is. Yes.
And we need you, Dr. Lane. We
Thank
need
you.
your expertise. We need your wisdom. It's been quite an interesting time the last few days. It feels like has it been 2 weeks or 2 years?
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah,
It was like
it's,
2 years to me.
yeah. I mean, I heard somebody say, like when it turned February 1st, it was like, boy, I'm glad the longest month of the year is over. I mean, it's been like only half of a month, and it's been a
Yeah,
whirlwind.
not
Yes.
even, if you think about it, not even half. And just to think that we're going into a 28-day month and it's going to feel even longer. I don't even want to go there. But I know we have so much to unpack here, so much to discuss. And as you know, you're in the Stop Being Invisible podcast in its new format in a new year. I think we're pretty committed this time around to like stay on it because there's so much that we need to discuss and there's so much that's going on. And as we were just saying, I think the name of this podcast could not be more appropriate at this time. We're not only going to stop being invisible, we're just never going to be invisible ever, ever again. I think those of us who are part of the community or have loved ones or friends or are in the community or are professionals in this field, in the field of, people with disabilities, understand that these are trying times. These are going to be difficult times ahead. We're not going to sugarcoat it. I'm not going to sugarcoat it for anybody. Um, I know these are going to be very difficult times. You and I know, Dr. Lane, because we have a memory and we've been around for a little bit longer than probably most parents that listen to this podcast. Um, but we could probably relate to a time where everything that we know and cherish today was not available to us. I certainly do.
Yeah, I do. I do too. I remember the students that we're talking about right now being in the basement of the school, and you never saw them. You'd see them get off the bus, but then they would disappear for the whole day, and then they would get back on the bus. They were totally isolated from the rest of the school.
Yeah,
That's what,
and this,
yeah,
I'm sure this was after 1974, after the law was signed, because I don't know if you feel the same way as I do, but I know that signing a bill into law doesn't mean that things happen overnight. I was doing a live yesterday on Facebook and I, kept repeating, the ADA is the law of the land, the American with Disabilities Act. For those of you, I'm going to refer to the ADA. That means the Americans with Disabilities Act. That's the law of the land. And for people in this community of people with disabilities, like the most important piece of legislation. Um, I work with a lot of people that were born in the 1990s, so they've never seen a world before this. However, Dr. Lane, that it wasn't that this was President Bush, the father, who signed it into law. It wasn't the next day that things started to change. There was a process. It's still something that we're still learning as a society. I mean, I remember his words when he said, with the stroke of a pen.
Yeah, right.
Do you
Hmm.
remember this? Because
I do.
I every so often I publish his speech on my feed because I find it really moving when he says, "With the stroke of a pen, there will be no more second class citizens in America, second, third, whatever," because that's how difficult it was. And you're telling us your experience, right? When children were in the basement, and this is after the IDEA, which IDEA, as we call it, also another acronym for Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, the most important piece of legislation for special education. You can't get better than that. Um, these two pieces of legislation, I think, make us, um, what would you say, the the icons of the world when it comes to this field.
I think they're like the
Example,
directing force. These are our guardrails, I guess would be a good
yeah,
way to describe it. We're supposed to play within these guardrails.
yeah. But they're so important that um it these this is something to look up to. It is not something to dismantle. It is, we're the examples of the entire world when it comes to this, and we don't want to be any less. We want to stay, and this we are still a work in progress. So, you know, need I say more?
No,
Um,
no, and I I think you're finding the same thing that I am. That people in the this community that we serve with both of our careers, they're asking what's going on with what's been happening in the last couple of weeks,
yeah,
and there's just so much uncertainty out
yes.
there right now, and
What have you been hearing?
just that they're hearing these things, but they don't know. And like we had talked about, maybe the best subtitle for this podcast would be the devil in the details.
Right,
And it's like there's no details, but everybody's hearing these major blasts. And it's
right,
like, okay, what is meant by that? What's going to be the bombshell? What's going to be the footprint that this action is going to leave? It's like, you know, like what's going to happen to my child when this finally does form out into specifics?
yeah.
And
Nobody
I'd be
really
saying
knows the specifics of anything, but we know, I would say, the the big framework, right? Um, I actually got some, I don't want to say statistics, but I something that I can relate to the let's talk about one of the executive orders that we heard about because it's been in the news, so this is not a secret. That there was an executive order that was signed by the current president, where the current administration is getting rid of DEI. Anything, any allusion to DEI, any DEI program. What does it mean? Diversity, equity, and inclusion. These are our bread and butter, right, Dr. Lane? That we work in diversity, equity, and inclusion. Equity is what we do. Equity is our work. So, I was pulling some issues that may come up because of these DEI order, the dismantling of DEI, let's just say, when it comes to the workplace and people with disabilities, right? So, for example, there might be a problem for disabled workers that need telework, right? They need to telecommute, right? Um, but for example, accommodations. Well, accommodations are something that we talk about all the time. Not just at work, but accommodations is something that is provided to you by the not only by IDEA in the schools, but also by the ADA, the Americans with Disabilities Act, for work, for everything, but specifically for work. So, so if you, to this day, right, we still have the ADA, so you can still request accommodations, but it could be challenging for you to even request them. Because remember, there's no longer DEI, there's no longer an equity program. So, if it's another non-disabled candidate, knocking on the door, I could just like, if I was an employer and I don't have to hire somebody that needs an accommodation, because I'm not required, I could change your title. I could get rid of your title, hire the next person
Yes.
who
You know,
who's not going to request the accommodation.
yeah, the accommodations,
Um,
and for employers, like, making these accommodations are not only time consuming, they're expensive.
yeah,
And just an example of an accommodation, Dr. Ingrid, when we started this podcast, you were not wearing your glasses.
yes,
And you just put your glasses on. That is an accommodation
it
that,
is.
that you're using to benefit you in our work.
So I can
And
read this piece of paper. And you're correct. A few years ago, I could read with or without glasses. These days, I need them to read. Um, and I would
and,
not be able to do this podcast or anything else. I wouldn't be able to do my paperwork for
and
work.
it's the accommodations can happen at any time. I mean, there's children that are born that need them as soon as they're born. So it's not like you have to wait until you're in your mid 30s like you are, Dr. Ingrid.
Oh,
But
thanks.
you're welcome. I had to get that complimented.
You're very kind. You're very kind. And I'm reading about like accessibility, right? Like accommodations for work, like software that allows visually impaired people to read computer monitors. The setups, for example, ramps for wheelchairs. The
Yes,
setups for
right.
wheelchairs.
Yeah,
When I was talking in my live, I said, what if I have two um candidates for a position? They're both equally amazing. Um, one uses a wheelchair to ambulate, the other one doesn't. Now I can completely say, without a I can say, I'm going to hire the other person because I don't need to abide by an equity program, right?
yes.
There was a
Mhm.
statistics that I'm trying to look for a statistic. Let's see. I don't know if I have it here. I think it said that 9%, you could correct me if I'm wrong, but 9% of people in the workforce are people with disabilities, and it's estimated that it's actually much higher than that. I'm looking for statistics right now. I see I have not even with my glasses I can find it, but I know it was here. Um, 9% of people. So imagine if 9% of people who need accommodations, and that's just 9% of the workforce. Because as you know, you don't have to disclose if you have a disability. You could just go to work and not disclose that you have a disability. And now if you don't feel like you need an accommodation, but you should if you need the accommodation, and nobody should say anything about it, like you need this accommodation. If I can get by my job without ever needing an accommodation, I don't need to disclose that. But if I feel like I do, then I disclose it, right? And I don't know, I mean, I hear a lot of rumors and things out there saying, well, all of a sudden this person had a disability. No, all of a sudden this person decided to disclose it, that they had a disability.
Right.
It's
Yes.
not that they came up with it yesterday, they
Right.
just disclosed it now. um so this is the reason why, um you know it seems as if there are people who all of a sudden, which can also happen, right?
Yes.
I may not be disabled today. I cross the street, get into an accident.
Right. Break a leg, you need an accommodation. You need to either have a wheelchair, have a, crutches or whatever,
Yeah,
and uh, I think again, what you asked me, what I've heard from people. I mean, I've heard that like parents are starting to like ask me, well, what should I do with the current accommodations that my child has? Will they lose those? Can the school just say, well, you don't need to work in small groups. You don't need your test read to you. You don't need extra time. They can just take all those things away. You know,
yeah,
and I'm telling parents that you need to get change it, schedule an IEP meeting, individualized education program meeting with the school staff, and get it in writing what those accommodations are going to be. Get it on paper because
that's
we
right.
always know we both know, and I can't tell you how many times I've preached it to parents. Documentation, documentation, documentation. If it's
Yeah,
not written, it never happened.
yeah. And also the IEP is your document. That's basically a legal document. So for the parents out there, I agree with Dr. Lane 100%. Make sure that you arrange for a meeting if you're concerned. If you have everything that you need, you're fine. Make sure that when you have your next IP meeting, right, that all of those things are still on paper. They're still on the IP. If it's not on paper, it doesn't matter if they told you that, right? Doesn't matter that it was talked about it at the meeting. No, it only matters that it's on that paper.
If it's not written down, it never happened.
Exactly. If it's not written down, it never have. It has to be on the IEP. So make sure that whatever you do, everything you do is on that IEP. The IEP ensures that everything that's on that document your child is entitled to. Now we're going to the next issue, which is people are a little bit confused about Medicaid and what Medicaid can do, right? Also block grants to states, especially, I don't know, every day is something new. I know today I sent you the article. I woke up and I there was a newspaper article in the New York Times saying, a lot of people in the Department of Education have been placed on leave. Very, very concerning. Um, we talk about DEI and the government trying to make sure that DEI programs, people who work in DEI programs in different agencies, departments of United States government are placed on leave or fired or whatever the case might be. The issue with Department of Education, tell me if you agree with me, Dr. Lane, is that basically Department of Education in and of itself is DEI. What does the Education Department deal with? Issues of disability, issues of poverty, issues of inclusion. Title One. Title One is a huge um I don't know if it's more than even the I IDA funds. I'm not even sure, but I think
Yeah,
it's a
yeah,
huge part of it. Um, but Title One is all those programs that protect children, um, in schools that need more support because they're in areas that need more help from the government. And it doesn't matter who you voted for, it will impact you more. Like I I believe if I'm not mistaken, you know, I don't want to call them red states because for us, for you and me, Dr. Lane, it doesn't matter where you
it
live
doesn't.
or what you are. Like your rights are your rights. It does not matter to us one bit. Um, but it will impact red states more because a lot of schools depend on Title One funds. Just very concerning for me. Like that's huge concerning, huge red flag. And I've been talking to people before, and I said, there were a lot of rumors about dismantling the Department of Education. The prior administration, um, this time around, I had a feeling they were going to go ahead and do it. And then I was like, well, I'm not sure. I don't want to scare people. make people go into a panic. But it's looking like it might.
Yeah.
And if it does, and if it's not dismantling, it's dismantled, it might be, what would you say, decimated?
Decimated, restructured, to meet the present feelings
Yeah,
towards education and towards, DEI. So,
yeah,
I mean, I think that's what we have to watch out for. That's
yeah,
that's where
yeah.
the devil is in the details. We have to get those
That
details
was in the details.
because without those, it could be like, and there's just so many executive orders being signed, and people don't know where the details are because they're just being sent out there
Right.
so quickly. It's like, and not. I feel so sorry for the people in California, but it's kind of like the California wildfires.
Oh, yeah.
Where where do you put your sources? Where do you put your water supplies?
And when do
Where do
you
you put
run?
Yeah, I mean, you can't keep putting out all these little fires, because they just keep popping up everywhere. And I think that's what's got so many people worried is, okay, what's the next executive order going to be about? And what are the details going to come out? Is it really going to happen? You
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
so
But I think what you said, like, and you have the best examples, like the fires, because, being prepared, and what you said about the IEP is be prepared. Make sure everything's in order when it comes, like, if you live in a fire prone area, you want to have, some of your belongings in a fireproof bag or something. Um, and I don't know because I don't live in a fire prone area, but I'm sure you want to be prepared in some kind of way. So, but for us, be prepared. Make sure your IP is in order. Make sure you follow through because we still have the law. It's still legal to have an IP and to have all these services. What you may have difficulty with is getting those services because it may be still owed to you, but you may have a little bit of difficulty getting them. Why? Because states are going to get block grants. Medicaid is going to be, well, right now it's frozen as we speak. I know states don't have access um, to Medicaid portals as far as I know. People who work with Medicaid, I know in my states, the Medicaid as of Friday it was still frozen. I don't know about you, Dr. Lane. Dr. Lane's in Delaware, so I'm not sure.
no,
Have you
I'm
heard?
not either. I mean, I think that was pretty much on the last I heard. That it had
Yeah.
frozen, and they were trying to get it back up, and I knew there were going to be error messages on a lot of the sites and all
Yes.
that. So yes.
Yeah. So we still, as far as we know, Medicaid still looks frozen. Technically, they have to let it flow. I know. Um, I know there was an order, and I didn't look too deep into it. From a judge saying to the 22 states that sued, money has to flow into them. I don't know about the other states. That remains to be seen. I know that they retracted temporarily
Right.
the memo. They retracted the memo, but not. So, from what I heard, the press secretary said the memo was retracted, but it was just temporary until they can figure out how to cut into those programs. Let's just say. So Medicaid cuts are coming. I don't think. I don't think that was a misunderstanding. I don't think that we're overreading this. Um, I think that's really coming. And the problem with that is, people think that Medicaid is only, health insurance for poor people. Well, let me tell you, Medicaid covers so many things that you're unaware of that it will blow your mind. There's so many programs that are being funded by Medicaid, especially most of the disability programs.
Right.
Um,
Yes.
that if I think I do have some numbers on this from the Arc of the United States, and this is an article from January this year. So I'm gonna say some of the things that will be impacted, right? Home and community-based services that help 4.5 million people with this that helps 4.5 million people with disabilities live, learn, work, and participate in their communities. So this will affect 4.5 million people that utilize home and community-based services. Early intervention
Yeah.
for young children, school-based therapies. So if your IEP says therapy, you may be in trouble. If you're getting speech therapy or TPT, you name it. There's vision services. You can tell me more, Doctor. I'm running out of. But there's so many.
Yeah, I mean, there's
Counseling.
OT, physical
Yes,
therapy,
mental health
occupational
services.
therapy, right? Job
Uh,
training, job
mobility
shadowing.
services. The list goes on. And equipment and technologies often excluded by private insurance. So a lot of our kids have augmented communication.
Right. Hmm.
They have used technology to communicate. They will be affected. Job skills training, placement, and coaching that enable people with disabilities to find meaningful, integrated employment opportunities. So it would impact employment for people with disabilities. A dollar amount, $1 of every six spent on healthcare in the US is Medicaid, making it the nation's largest single source of health coverage. Support for schools, hospitals, and local economies. So a lot of what people do is supported by Medicaid. A lot of jobs are supported by Medicaid. Um, Medicaid kind of makes our nation go round.
Yeah. And again, back to the parents that are contacting me. Is my child, my young adult, my adult, going to lose their job because of these Medicaid possible cuts? And then, you know, we know that our population has a very low employment rate to begin with.
Exactly.
And if they lose their jobs, then they're being home supported by the parents, and sometimes they have to live with the parents anyway. So if the individual is not bringing money home to help the family, that's a burden on the family also.
Yeah.
Either from work or from Medicaid. That's going to be a problem.
Yeah. And here's some current statistics on Medicaid, which is already stretched thing. Anyone who does work with adults with disabilities, or if you're like me and you work with the younger population with early intervention, Medicaid is vital. And you already know this, for example, here in New York, and we are one of the lucky states. Delaware is probably a lucky state. Massachusetts probably the luckiest. But already there's wait lists in every single one of these states for early intervention services. Wait list because we are reimbursed very low rate through Medicaid. We haven't Here in New York we haven't seen a raise in I think 15 years.
It's been, I
Um,
guess, but yeah,
So, Medicaid is already stretched thin. 711,000 people are waiting for home and community-based services. 711,000 people. 73% of which are people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. Let that sink in for a second. 73% of people with intellectual and developmental disabilities are waiting for services. So this is today. Imagine cuts. 40% turnover among care workers due to low reimbursement rates leaves families without critical support, which negatively impact their careers and finances, which is what you were saying, Dr. Lane. There's such a huge turnover rate. You could just go to a day treatment program for adults, and you will see. 25 plus million Americans lost Medicaid coverage after pandemic protections ended, often due to paperwork issues, not ineligibility. So the stakes for the disability community are very, very high. Um, so Medicaid is the cornerstone of daily life for over 10 million children and adults with disabilities, funding 77% of essential services for fit people for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. Without it, many would lose their independence, forced into nursing homes, which doesn't help anybody, doesn't help society, or state-run institutions. And we know the days of state-run institutions, right?
Right.
I mean, we
Mhm.
know.
Yeah.
States would face severe constraints on eligibility and funding, leaving families across the country without options for vital services. And if you live in a state that needs a lot of help through for Medicaid, I urge you to call your Congress people, your senators, and let them know that you have, a loved one with disabilities, and that your loved one needs services. Services are vital to you. Um, what would your advice be, Dr. Lane?
Again, I have to go. I mean, I think you hit it 100% on the head. We've got to go to the state representatives along with the federal representatives because when the states start making noise, then the government will maybe reconsider what they're doing. And I think with the loss of services, we got to go back to that the IEP again, because if it's in the IEP, you can at least say, you said my child would get it, or it's written, not that you said, it's documented that my child is entitled to this,
Right.
and you know, we both know that parents sometimes aren't aware of these laws. We're using acronyms that they don't understand. They go to the IEP meetings, they don't understand what's going on there. And the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act allows them to bring somebody along to help advocate for their child at these meetings.
Yes.
And that's, you know, and the law is very vague. All it says is they have to be familiar with your child. So, and you get to choose who it is. The district can't tell you no. So, it's there's people out there who can help you advocate for your child's rights.
Yeah.
So you don't need to go this alone. And that might be our next podcast. You don't need to do this alone, So, but
Yeah. Um, so on that note, and we have to start wrapping up here, but I want to tell you, um, you can leave us a comment here. Dr. Lane has been doing this for a long time, advocating for and with families, right? Um, I've been doing this for a long time as well. Dr. Lane for a little bit longer. He's a lot of experience um, being with families at IEP meetings, guiding families through the process. And so if you have any questions, please leave us a comment here. I also want to reiterate what Dr. Lane said about it doesn't matter where you live. It doesn't matter what state of the United States you live in. These laws apply to everyone in the United States. So wherever you live, you call your state representatives as well because they should be, I want to say, your first line of defense. I know some towns have education liaisons that you can rely on. You can call them. You can call if you have a council, if you have trustees, some towns do have trustees. Um, you can call your very local representatives. I believe in local makes a huge difference. Because your local representatives, they know you, they know who you are. Um, so it's one thing to call someone that has no idea who you are, never saw you. Another thing is to call your neighbor. Right? They know who you are and they can advocate for you. So
because
right?
like in the bigger states, I mean, if you call your senator from
Yeah.
California, You're like one out of a gazillion.
Millions
Yeah,
of people.
right.
Yeah.
Like in Delaware, if you call your senator, they probably met you somewhere, either at the supermarket or they've seen you somewheres, or you've been at a political rally for them, and they're going to remember.
Yeah.
So it's a lot more. That local is a lot more
Makes a
affected than
difference.
it is. But
Yeah.
yes, but it's local, then state, and then federal. But again, back to the law. The state law can exceed what the federal law says, but it can't do less than the
Yeah.
federal.
Yes.
So
Excellent point. Excellent point. So remember that. Okay, everybody. Unfortunately, we have to wrap up for today. Um, but like we said, leave us a comment. We're going to be here with you. We're going to fight for you. We're going to be here with you. We're going to walk with you. And we'll be together. We'll fight this. We'll be together every step of the way.
yeah. And
Um,
Dr. Ingrid, I'd like to add it. Sorry, I didn't mean to, but I'd like to add if they have topics that they'd like us to talk about, or if they have an idea, if they
Let
want
us
to submit
know.
that.
Let us know. We'll be more than happy to engage in whatever topics you want us to, whatever you want us to talk about. We'll be here. And without
We can't
further
do personal.
ado,
We can't do personal questions, like we can't talk about
right?
your particular child. But if you have a general topic that you want us to talk about,
Yeah.
we I think that would, it's a great forum for them to give us ideas also.
All right, everyone. And having said that, we have to wrap it up over here. And everybody, have a wonderful rest of your day. We'll see you next time.
Thank you. Bye bye.
Thank you.